I have this joke that actually my mother taught me, and I have to do it every time. So the first question is, can you hear me? And the other one is, can you see me? We're not very tall in my family, so my mother will usually be like this. But anyway, okay, so what I'm going to talk to you today is about easy and affordable user testing. I'm going to mention a lot of tools, and sometimes people get a little bit stressed out. They don't have the time to write it all down. So there's a link for all the tools, and I'm going to repeat the link in the end. So this is just for you to not worry about not getting the URL. So the first question that I have for you is whether you do user testing. Have you ever done it, or do you do it regularly? Please raise your hand. Quite a few people, but not that many. The thing is, though, when sometimes people say, yeah, I do a little bit of user testing, I make sure that things are usable, because I have really nice colleagues, so I just ask my colleagues. But colleagues are not users. There's an exception, though. They are your users if you're making an intranet. Or like you ask your, like the people that you know, your friends, maybe they're designers like you, but designers rarely are your users either. Maybe if you're designing Dribble, you could ask designers. And the developers in particular are not your users, they're very tech-savvy, or maybe if you're building a tool like GitHub. The thing is that people like us that work so much with websites and spend so much time looking at websites or apps or stuff like that, we know so much more than the average user. And that makes it very difficult for us to just spot usability problems just by looking at something. Do you remember the big debate about the hamburger icon? Remember this? The hamburger icon. Okay, raise your hand if you think the hamburger icon is a good idea. Raise your hand really high if you have ever made a website that uses the hamburger icon. Really tall. Okay, so you guys are all guilty of the hamburger thing. So we had this discussion at the company that I used to work, and I was like, well, maybe we should just test if people understand it. So we had a survey sent out to more than 4,000 Norwegians. This was done by the Norwegian Post, so it's quite representative of the average Norwegian users. And they had this photo, so you can see this is like a screenshot from the mobile website. It's even like a little arrow pointing it out, and the question simply was, do you know what this icon means? And 53% said no. And on desktop, 73% said no. And the best part was we also had like a free field open questions as well. Okay, so you know what it means. Please tell us, what does it mean? And like 50% of the written answers was wrong. So there's so many things that we keep doing in our application and website that we think are obvious that aren't obvious for the typical users. This was in 2014. Maybe more people understand it now, but the Norwegian Post Office should not really be in the forefront of digital conventions for websites. And the thing is that all of these things that seem so obvious for us, it can be very enlightening looking at actual users trying to use them. It can sometimes feel a little bit like this. But it's so obvious, and this is basically why you need to use your test. This is what it's going to feel like over and over and over again. And if GIFs are not enough to convince you, I have a table with numbers, which might be more convincing to developers. So this is a review of different tests where they have compared the number of usability problems that were found when experts looked at this solution as compared to when they did user testing. And to make it a little bit more tabloid, what they're saying here is that 1 out of 3 problems that the experts found were so-called false alarms. So the experts said, this is a problem, it shouldn't be like this, but it didn't actually show up as a problem in the user testing. And also, 1 out of the 2 problems that the users had weren't actually found by the experts. So just having some kind of user research UX expert looking at your solution is not enough to find the problems. It might even tell you that you have problems that might not actually be real. And the key then to why user testing can actually be done quite efficiently and cheap is that you don't really need that many people to find, like, okay, I showed you three GIFs with 3 different guys trying to drink a glass of water. We don't really need to see more of those blonde guys trying to drink the glass of water. We already know we have a problem. The magic number that is often mentioned is the number 5. You just need 5 users to test with. This is based on like a theoretical, mathematical idea. Is this function here? So if we imagine that, if we imagine that 30% of you will have a problem if you try to visit the front end's website, what's the probability if we just pick a random 5 number out of you that we will observe that problem? So the graph kind of goes like this. So if you're testing with 5 people, you will have roughly 85% chance of observing that problem. And the thing is that if you add more people, like we want to be more certain, like you can go up to 8. Okay, so you're getting to 95%, but you've almost doubled the amount of people you're testing with, double the time spent, the resources spent, but you haven't really gotten that much sure that you're going to observe it. Like, just testing with 3 people, you already get to roughly 70%, but the most important thing is, though, and you all know math, how big is your chance of observing a usability problem if you test with 0 people? Yes, you are right. It is 0. So we can have debates going on, like, should it be 10? Should it be 20? Should it be 30? Should it be 5? Should it be 3? The point is, as long as you don't test with anyone, you can be quite sure you will not find any problems. So what I'm going to show you now is like 7 low-cost, low-effort techniques to do user testing. These are stuff you could do tomorrow. My number 1 technique, my favorite technique, is hit the streets. This can take anywhere from like 1 to 8 hours. It's very cheap. All you need is snacks. One of the things I've tested is, like, in the course of one day, we had a paper sketch, threw it into Illustrator, and made an Envision app, and like, okay, let's go and test this. And after you have some kind of prototype or something existing, it's very easy. You just like need a laptop or a tablet or a phone, and then you hit the streets. It's that easy. You need some kind of way to convince people to talk to you anyway, which is snacks. So this is me and a guy called Morten when we tested an early version of this for a solution for the Norwegian Labour Party, where regular people were supposed to be able to suggest changes to the Labour Party's politics. It was a very easy form, and it was supposed to be able to be used by anyone. So we actually just took this bag, like this basket of snacks, and we went down to the central station. And as you now know, I understand I'm not very shy. So what you do is you take the tablet here is like way back behind the chocolate. This is important. And then you go to the central station. And it's important, like, because what does a central station look like? It kind of looks like this. A lot of people walking like this. It's like, how can you do user testing in this kind of environment? Well, that's not actually true. A lot of the times, the people at the central station will be just standing like this on their phones, bored, waiting for someone. And that's when you sneak up on them, and they see the chocolate, and then you have eye contact, and just give them the tablet. And it is like, do you have 2 minutes? I have chocolate. I promise we're not going to keep you more than 2 minutes. This works in Norway, at least. I'm not sure if it works in Poland that well, because I was asked for ID when I came to the conference. I'm like, maybe you're not as trusting as the stupid Norwegians, but anyway. And there's an important thing here also. you see there's a lot of chocolate there. It's very important to have the bananas. The reason for this is that people who are on the diet will not talk to you unless you have the bananas. But then after they talk to you, they reward themselves for considering the bananas, and then they will take the chocolate after all. I can tweet the link to the research that has actually shown this. So when I go shopping before user testing, it looks a little bit like this. Except you don't really need that many bananas because people won't eat the bananas, so you actually need more chocolate, actually. Okay, so this is the very outgoing version that might work in in Norway at least. So if you don't want to go over to complete strangers, you have a different group of semi-strangers that are also known as your Facebook friends. So what I've also done a couple of times is just like tell my Facebook friends that I will give them cinnamon buns. This is translated by Google, so Norwegian translated by Google sounds very funny. I share the cinnamon buns again. In return, you must give me 10 to 20 minutes of your time to try out the prototype on Thursday. I can get to where you are. This is key. Are you with? Can I be allowed this time? And I am with. I also like this guy because I'm asking if anyone has any tips on how I can easily recruit people who are 50 plus, like give me a shout out. And then this guy, I am no more than 37. But come to my office between 13 and 15, then I'll test your solution. So the key here is then these people are willing to offer their time because like, it's just 15 to 20 minutes and I will come to your place. And I'll come whenever it works for you. And this was actually, so the next thing I needed then, I just got on my bike. And so this is Oslo. So I started off at 9 in the morning at the east side, and this is actually, so I was able to test with 9 people in one day in their offices and spaces, and the only cost I had for recruitment was that I promised all of them to get, that they would get a cinnamon bun. And they were really happy about the cinnamon buns. So yeah, here we are. So in this example, I've just brought my own laptop, and also to document it, because it's just me on the bike, I've just used the QuickTime, the built-in screen recording, and then I think he starts speaking in a little second. So then I didn't really need to take notes on the way. I could just like do the test, do the recording, jump on the bike, go to the next person. So the trick to...
Dere kommer til å bli dritbra når man lærer seg å bruke det. For det så lett, og det så pen layout på det.
There's also a baby in the background here. So it's a very realistic test setting.
Frem til man...
The baby doesn't like the prototype. That's me calming the baby. It's just like out in the field. Yeah. Yeah. So actually, if you have a Mac, QuickTime already has this, and you just have to make sure that you turn on the microphone, and also you can turn on screen clicks. And afterwards, I just took the highlights and just uploaded a couple of clips to the Slack channel with the people that I'm with. So I think in total, I spent maybe like 9.5 hours to test with 8 people and document it. And the cost for the cinnamon buns are very expensive in Norway, so that was like 20 euros. Okay, so this technique demands of you to like meet people and talk to people and go out of the house. If you don't like that, I have some tricks for you guys too. I'm sure everyone here who's ever made anything has argued with people about information architecture. This takes maybe like 30 minutes to set up a survey like this. It's the small one with just 10 participants is free. And what you do then is you build a survey that kind of mimics the structure of your information architecture, and then you ask people a question. So here's the example. Your son has just bought a smartphone and you want him to keep it safe. Where would you look to buy a protective case? And then people search through these menu options and say, I think I would find it here. And afterwards, you get numbers and everything, but my favorite is you get this kind of like, it's called tree jack. So you kind of get this visual map of how people moved. So the thicker the line, the more people went down there. If it's green, they went down where you wanted them to go. So you could look like this, or like this. This is what it looks like when you did a good job. This is from the Norwegian Labour Party. This is what it looks like when you kind of need to go back to the drawing board. Kind of like a tumbleweed rolling into my door. Yes, that's definitely a tumbleweed. Okay, so to improve this, we also have this like first click tests. Also, you could take maybe like 30 minutes, roughly the same price. So this is my friend and colleague Jørgen that I work a lot with. We saw this horrible tumbleweed and we thought, well, maybe if we try to do some visual things and also change the headings a little bit, maybe more people will be able to find it. So we asked the same questions as in the information architecture survey, but then we showed people a screenshot of the website instead. And then you get like this heat map of where people clicked. And then we saw that, well, a lot more people are finding it, like 72% clicked here, 8% clicked here. This makes sense, we're on the right track. Another thing that's fun to do is like to let your prototype meet actual users. This doesn't really have to take that much time either if you already have a prototype, and you can use like free tools like Hotjar or Google Analytics to get more insight. So we were going to test a new long-read article format for a Norwegian NGO, and user testing something like a long-read article format is kind of difficult because you can't really like take someone into the lab and like, please read this article. Was it difficult to read, or like, what are you really looking for to find the usability issues? And what if they just like think this story is really boring? Is that what we're testing? So instead, they just shared the prototype on their Facebook page, but they didn't say that it was a prototype. They're just like, read this exciting story about Alexander who met his sponsored child. But if you guys will notice that the URL is actually just to the prototype. But on that prototype, we had then put on Hotjar and Google Analytics, because the thing we were wondering was, will these really big photos make people think that the page is over? And will they click anything, and how far will they read? And instead of having a debate on that, we could just test it. You could just see that, because the colors indicate where people dropped off, how far did they scroll, and you see it's very gradual. So there's no indication here that the big photos made people think that the page was over, because then there would be like a clearer drop-off. It's just like steadily, and we can also look at the clicks later on. So that was a very easy and cheap way, because we just used the prototype we had anyway. Another one that also lets you do kind of cheap user insight without meeting anyone is like, did you get it done? This can also be very easily implemented. My friend, I have a link for that on the blog post, made a script where you can just like enter it via Google Tag Manager, and then you already have it. So it's basically free. If you have no idea what I was talking about just now, it's like the boxes like this. Was this page helpful? So this is more like to improve parts of your website that you already had. We could also use it for insight before a redesign. And actually, the city of Oslo are using this. They have like this huge control panel to see which parts of their website is doing best, or should I say worst. So these are like the different URLs, and then you see the number of clicks, and also the percentages of people that, no, I didn't find what I was looking for. Or, yay, I did find what I was looking for. And then I prioritize which pages and sections I should improve, depending on whether people are saying no or yes, not that much on whether people are just visiting the pages. So over time, it's gradually getting better for the city of Oslo. I guess their ambition is that the green would eventually cross the red line and there will be more, yes, I found it, than no, I didn't. A sixth technique, very, very cheap, but it might include that you need to talk to someone. It's microtesting content. This takes like 30 minutes, but it's very free. So in its most lo-fi version, you need a printer. But that's almost high-tech these days to have a printer. Who has a printer anymore? But anyway, if you do have a printer, you have the text that you want to test with the title and the intro, and you fold the paper so that you can just read the title and the intro, and then you ask people, you give them this sheet and you tell them, can you please write down 3 to 4 questions you expect will be answered on this page? And after they've done that, you tell them, well, you can now open the sheet, and can you please highlight whether you got your questions answered or not, or note out different things. Because the thing is, the good thing about this is that you end up getting feedback on like kind of user needs rather than like, oh, you have a typo and your grammar is off. It puts people into the zone of thinking like, well, what do I expect to find on this page? It's very easy and it's very useful, and you could do it on like an email. Just send them the title and intro, have them send the questions back, and then the other way. Or you can make some kind of a survey out of it. Okay, so the first thing that I mentioned, like hitting the streets and going to people's homes, are very active things that you need to do, and you can't really be that shy and afraid about people. The other ones lets you kind of like hide behind your desk and do a little bit of user research. But there's kind of a middle ground here that we used a lot in the company where I used to work, where we did this weekly drop-in test. So requires a little bit more of, maybe you need to be a little bit of a bigger company for this to make sense, but if you're like more than 50 people, or even more than 40 people, it very quickly makes sense, or it could be bi-weekly instead of weekly, or it could be monthly. So the costs then are primarily the time spent and also rewarding subjects, because then you need to recruit people and have them come to the lab, and then you need to set up a lab. But it has become very easy and cheap to set up a lab too. Today, basically to have a lab, you just need 2 laptops and some kind of software that will transfer the sound and the image from one room to the other. Also, of course, everyone would like to have a proper, really well-functioning eye tracker, because it makes it a lot easier to interpret the results. But the software that is now using web cameras to track where people are looking are getting a lot better. So this is eye tracking done with the web camera. So it's not as precise as a expensive, fancy eye tracker, but we're getting there. So I think this is open source. At least you can just download it and set that up. If you're testing on mobile, you can get pretty far just like using a tripod and a web camera, just looking down on the phone. Also, a very low-tech and funny way to do this is so-called hugging. I'm not sure if you can see what it's doing here, but you just take the laptop, turn it around, and he's sitting with his phone here. Can you see? Yeah, doing this basically. And then we can look what he's doing on the screen on this other laptop here. So after you set up the lab, you can have like one day, like maybe it's every Wednesday is your company. It should probably be like one person that's responsible to like do moderating and recruiting the test subjects. Where I work, we used to have like 4 people each Wednesday, and they would be there for an hour, and then people could sign up their projects. So the same person would maybe test 3 different projects in one sitting. This is a very efficient way of testing things, because also the different teams, they didn't really have to plan that long ahead for something to be tested. They could like, on Friday, we were like, oh, we should really test it. Let's throw it in on the test day on Wednesday, or even on Monday if it was still room. So it was very popular. Yeah. So typically also if you do it like this, it could be nice to have like 20, 30-minute break between each test subject, because then you get time to like really discuss what you saw, sometimes even fix stuff. This is from a test again with the Norwegian Labour Party, where there's a Morten from the client and also Jørgen, who's their front-end developer. Like we saw some stuff in the first test, and like, oh, I'm just going to change it. And then the next 3 tests, it wasn't really a problem anymore. It's like, well, maybe let's try and do this. And then we would test again, of course. And also just contributing our notes continuously throughout the day in Slack to spend less time documenting the test. And also what I've found very useful, actually for documenting findings from usability tests is actually Envision app, because Envision app has this comment mode. So if you already have screenshots of all of the most important pages, it's very easy to say like, this thing doesn't work, and then people will actually understand what you mean when you said this thing, because the comment is attached to this thing. Yeah. So I think so these are the 7 methods that I have mentioned. I don't think that you should do just one of them. These are best used in combination. And I think it's very important that you, like for instance, it could be that you used this technique of like hitting the streets. So you can have like qualitative interviews, maybe with 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people. Maybe something like the information architecture, the menu structure, you would like to test that with more people, maybe have like 50 people or something doing that at least, and you can see a little bit more like a pattern in the data. And also if you have a launch site afterwards, like did you get it done on the finished launch site? A combination of those 3 will give you quite a lot of insight on a very, very, very small budget. Another way would maybe to keep the information architecture tests. If you can't include that, did you find what you were looking for? You could do the microtesting content, like the title and the intro, to look at more like the needs and the text, and then do some of those drop-in tests. Because my most important message, I guess, is you should really do some kind of user testing where you meet actual users and see them in the eye and have that experience of like thinking, that's just a glass of water. How difficult could it be? It's like, well, it can actually be very difficult if you didn't build it yourself. And having that, as was mentioned, to feel like actual empathy with your users, it helps a lot to see them actually use it. So I'm hoping that you had some kind of aha moment throughout this talk. And if you didn't have an aha moment, I have this joke that actually my mom taught me, my mother taught me, and I have to do it every time. So the first question is, can you hear me? And the other one is, can you see me? We're not very tall in my family, so my mother will usually be like this. But anyway, okay, so what I'm going to talk to you today is about easy and affordable user testing. I'm going to mention a lot of tools, and sometimes people get a little bit stressed out. They don't have the time to write it all down. So there's a link for all the tools, and I'm going to repeat the link in the end. So this is just for you to not worry about not getting the URL. So